We welcome all of you to the program this morning honoring Jack D. Lewis. He's a great neighbor of ours for many years. We're pleased that you're able to come and honor him for his stellar life and example that he's given to all of us. The family prayer was offered by Colin Lewis, a grandson. We appreciate the kind words that were mentioned in that prayer. We'll go forward with the funeral service as outlined on your program. Many of you may be wondering as you open it up, the picture that appears on the right-hand side, I had to ask about that, and it is actually Jack holding his first grandson and granddaughter, excuse me. I only missed it by one. Granddaughter. But you can see in his face how much he loved his family and his grandchildren, and I personally can testify to his desire and his love for his family. I'm Richard Verheeren, I'm conducting, and the chorister today will be Alan Green. Our pianist is Connie Stopper. If you look on the back of your program, there's a song that's called Each Life That Touches Ours for Good, and that will be the opening song. After the opening song, the opening prayer will be offered by Gary Woodruff, also a close friend and not too distant neighbor of Jack. We'll proceed with the program to that.
Our Father in heaven, a few friends and neighbors and family members of Jack D. Lewis gather together to celebrate his life. Father, we're so thankful for him, thankful what he lived in this area. And he was such a benefit to all of us who were neighbors and friends and enjoyed him so much. he was a great man, Father, and now he's with thee, and we appreciate the association we've had with him, and they appreciate that he is now with his eternal companion. Father, again, would thank thee that he lived in our area, that he lived and was one of thy servants. We appreciate him, ask the blessing upon him and upon these services, that the things that are done and said will be in accordance to thy mind and will. We express our love to the things that he has left us with, taught us, and the things that we have learned from him. We ask of these things and say it in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
At the request of the family, we will hear remarks from the daughter, Annette Lorraine, and the daughter, Susan Chavez, and son, Kyle Lewis. I might mention that those of you who have not had an opportunity to go out and look at the very beautifully written obituary, I would suggest that you do that. It encapsulates a great life of Jack and is very well done and is fitting for his memory. We'll now have those remarks. At the close of the remark by Kyle, we'll hear a vocal solo from Alan Green singing I'll Be Seeing You. The pianist is Connie Stopper, and the closing prayer will be offered by Laurel Verheeren. At that point in time, I'll take a few minutes to give us instructions as to how to meet at the cemetery in Alpine. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Annette, and I'm the youngest of Jack and Jerry's 4 children, but today I'm going to call Jack Dad. So, Dad is the only person I know who could tell a joke and get teary-eyed doing it because he was thinking fondly of the person who told the joke to him. As you know, he was kind of a weeper because he was very tender-hearted. And it was one of the best things about him as I was recalling my memories of him through our childhood. So I just thought maybe I'd share a few with you that you might not know, since they were very personal to me. I'm thinking of a time when we were living in Alaska. We had just moved there. It was in 3rd grade. It was the last day of school before Christmas vacation, and I won a prize. It was a big Christmas present, and I ran home clutching it to my chest and ripped open the wrapping in front of my family, and it was a big jigsaw puzzle. A lot of pieces, a lot of small pieces. And my sister and my brother said, "Oh, jigsaw puzzle, you're gonna hate that. They're so boring and tedious, and oh, too bad." And I said, "It's my present, and I'm certain that I am going to love it." So I went to the dining room table and spread it all out, and I think a while later my dad saw me there kicking my legs in a too-high chair, just overwhelmed by all these pieces. I had no clue what to do, and he knew my pride was at stake. It wasn't the puzzle. It was, I had informed everyone I was going to love it, but. So he wandered over and gave me some tips, and then he sat down and started doing it with me, and once we got the edge pieces and so on, it started clicking with me how to do this. And only because my dad was sitting there doing that with me, all the puzzle haters in the family wandered over one by one and said, "Oh, well, I think that goes here," and then pretty soon it was the best impromptu family home evening ever, and Dad let me save face, and the puzzle got done that night. And I was always grateful to him for that, because I had very few victories being the youngest child in a family. So fast forward to when I'm 15 years old in the summer of 1976, and not terribly mature, but trying to get there. And I remember that Dad got a call. It was specifically for him, not Mom. And he started crying on the call. And when when the call ended, we were at the kitchen table. He put his head in his hands on the kitchen table. He just wept. He just sobbed. And my mom and I were sure that somebody had died. And when he got himself together enough that he was able to talk, he explained that the Teton Dam in Idaho had burst. And that was a call telling him that his sister Deidre and her husband Tom had made it out. They were safe. And so being an impertinent 15-year-old, I said, well, so what's the problem? Why are you crying? They're safe. This is cause for celebration. And not realizing that tears could mean a lot of different things. And anybody else would have snapped at me. They had every right to, but Dad was, well, he was able to collect himself enough to say, oh, net. They had something like a 10-minute warning. All they could do was throw their boxes of genealogy they'd been working on in the back of the truck, the family photo albums. Deidre grabbed a sweater, and off they went, knowing that they would probably never see their home again. And they were leaving all their belongings behind, everything that they'd worked for. They were leaving their neighborhood, their friends, their ward. Nobody knew if they'd be able to come back and rebuild. He said, if they're able to come back, it's going to be debris and rubble, and their world's going to be turned upside down. And he was very patient as he explained that. And I felt about this tall, but I also matured at least another year with that experience, and it always stuck with me, and also with the tenderness that he had for his family, and then his kindness to me in letting me know the bigger picture, which I needed. Dad knew sorrow from a young age. As some of you know, his much older brother, Bill, Bill's first wife died in childbirth, and then the infant died as well. And Dad's job, I think he was about 8 years old, his job was to accompany Bill home from the hospital and stay with him for several days and nights. So Dad doesn't talk about that, but it made a big impression on him, and my mother confirmed that. So he knew sorrow from a young age, but at the same time he was a little freckle-faced boy who adored tractors, gave his uncle practically a heart attack because he'd climb all over the thresher, and his uncle was afraid he was going to get hurt, and he told me that the neighbors had a Caterpillar tractor, and every year they gave him the catalog that Caterpillar mailed, and he memorized the Caterpillar catalog every year. He was big-hearted. I saw him cry almost as hard one time when I was watching a movie on our little 9-inch TV, because my parents wanted to emphasize to me that television is not important. So again, I was a teenager and I'm watching a comedy on this TV, and Dad is pretending to read the paper. I say pretending because I could see his eyes coming over the print and watching, and by the end of the movie, when it's the big funny chase scene, he was crying. He was crying tears of laughter. He was he was on the sofa, just falling down sideways on the sofa, holding his stomach, laughing. He was just in hysterics. He thought it was so funny. And I love those memories. He could get that way just with Suzanne and Kyle at the dinner table, giving him a hard time about his Lehigh accent or any number of things. And he would just laugh so hard he would have tears rolling down his cheeks. And those are my favorite memories of him. And so I just hope that we can all remember him and learn from his empathy and his kindness and the grace he showed, whether it was with sorrow or with great joy. Thank you.
My sister and I didn't coordinate, but we think along the same lines. I also wanted to share some memories I had of my father. First, I wanted to say how grateful I am to see people here. My parents loved Alpine. Annette and I weren't able to be here a year ago when our mother passed away, and so for us, I think this day is also to pay tribute to our mother. They loved the 6th Ward, and during the 30 years they were in Alpine, they recounted to me so many occasions where their neighbors showed kindness to them. And it was always reassuring to me, especially as they got elderly, that they had people looking out for them. I should have gone first so I wouldn't come up here crying already. When we were little, we grew up in other states, and my parents would bring us to Utah to visit with our grandparents in Salt Lake and our grandparents in Lehigh. And on occasion when we were in Lehigh, my father would say, let's go up to Timpanogos Cave. My father loved Timp. He climbed that mountain I don't know how many times. He took my mom up there on a date. They went up to the top and slid down the glacier, and my mom said, I didn't know I wanted to see him anymore. He loved that mountain. He loved to hike. So when we were little, as soon as we could, he took us up to the caves, and we loved it. And then when my 2 oldest kids were big enough, and they were living in Alpine, he said, why don't we take the kids up to the cave? My daughter, Noelle, the one that's in the picture on the program, she was about 8, and my son, Paris, was about 6. And they were good hikers, and we went up and we had a great time. And as we were on the way down, my children were ahead of us on the trail. My dad and I came around a switchback in the trail, and we saw both of those kids squatting down, looking at something off trail. They were entranced by something. And as we drew closer, we saw that it was a rattlesnake. And my children didn't know what it was. They had never seen a rattlesnake, and I was probably derelict in my parental duties because we live where there are rattlesnakes, but I had never taught them anything about them. And they were just fascinated. And it was fascinating. It was coiled up and vigorously waving its rattles around. And I would like to say my motherly instincts kicked in, but they did not. I froze. I was just petrified. And my dad, 30 years my senior, had reflexes like an Olympic athlete. He reached out and he grabbed those kids by the collar, the nape of the neck, and he pulled them into the trail. And I'll remember at that exact time, he said very calmly, and this is so typical of him, he's the king of understatement, he said, I think we'll step away from that. I was so relieved, and as we were walking down the trail, I started having tears stream down my face. I said, that could have been so bad, and I couldn't even move, and I feel terrible about that. And he said, it's okay, Suzanne. And he put his arm around my shoulder. He probably walked half a mile down that trail with his arm around my shoulder, and he said, it's okay, it's gonna be all right, your kids are fine. And if we go backwards, many years from that, when I was a 6-year-old, I learned about rattlesnakes from my dad for the first time. We were traveling on a road trip in the desert southwest, and I don't remember exactly where we were. We spent a lot of time in the desert. My parents loved the beauty of the desert, and we spent time in the Mojave in California and in New Mexico, and they loved going to Navajo country in southern Utah and in Arizona. But I was happy because I was 6 and I had a dot-to-dot book. And I was doing dot-to-dots in the back of the station wagon. And we went over a bump in the highway, and the book flew off my lap, and my pencil went into my knee. And it wasn't in very far, but it was a very sharp pencil. And I threw a fit. I was crying, and it didn't even hurt, but it was terrifying to see a pencil in my leg. And so I doubt you've seen a 6-year-old carry on like that, but I went on, and my dad pulled the car over to the side of the road. That car's name was Linda. It was a 58 Chevy station wagon. We were styling back then. And my dad named all of our vehicles. And that car was Linda because he had bought it in Yorba Linda, California. So we pulled Linda over to the side of the road and went back there, and he pulled the pencil out of my knee, and I continued to cry because there was a small hole in my knee with black stuff in it. I said, "There's black stuff in my knee," and he said, "Look what I got," and I carried on, and he got in the back of the car and he brought this square box out. He says, "You know what this is? It's a snake bite kit." He said, "I always carry this in the desert." And it kind of intrigued me, and I stopped crying, and he says, "Look what it has inside." It had a little suction device. He said, "I'm going to use this on your knee, and if there's anything bad from the pencil in your leg, it will take it out." He says, "If this works when there's rattlesnake poison in a person from a bite, it's going to get anything bad from that pencil out." And I was really intrigued by it. I said, "I want to hear about rattlesnakes." So while he was suctioning my knee, which I'm sure 20% of it was to get any toxins out, and 80% of his motivation was to calm me down, he said all about rattlesnakes and what to do if you were bitten. And my mother was there, and I've been told that I look like my mother. And I know, and sometimes I open my mouth and I hear her. My mother said, "Oh, Jack, don't tell her about rattlesnakes. You'll just frighten her." And I said, "I want to hear about them." So after he was done telling me about them, and he put antiseptic on it, and he put a Band-Aid on it, he patted me on the shoulder and he said, "See, it's okay, it's going to be fine." And then we go forward about 60 years, and my father was a resident in an assisted living facility here in Utah County. And I was able to visit him one time there, but most of the time I was only able to visit him by phone. And I called him on this particular day, and my brother Kyle answered the phone and said, "Dad's not really talking today." And I knew my dad was weak, and I knew he'd fallen and hit his head twice in the preceding weeks, and Kyle said, "He's just not really talking. I'm reading to him, and he's enjoying it. He's nodding his head, he's giving me nonverbal cues, but he really don't expect him to talk." And I said, "Okay." So I got on the phone, I said, "Dad, hi, how are you?" And he didn't say anything, and I could hear him laboring to breathe. And Kyle had told me, "You know, you ought to tell him about the last hike you went on. He'd enjoy that." So I asked him how he was, and he didn't say anything, and I said, "I went on a hike the other day, about 3 days ago, and I said, I told you about this hike once, some years ago. It's the highest mountain in my county in Oregon, and I told you that I had to go off trail to summit the mountain, and it was really, really steep. And I told you I had to go through a meadow that was so steep that I wanted to know how steep it was. And the next time you saw me, you gave me a clinometer." My dad had given me this old analog clinometer that he'd used in the 1950s when he worked for Standard Oil. He worked for Standard Oil for many decades, and he walked literally hundreds of miles of pipeline for Standard Oil through Utah, and all their pipeline in Idaho and in eastern Washington. He and another fellow walked along checking the conditions where these pipelines were, and they'd walk 10 or 15 miles a day, and he would use this clinometer sometimes to gauge the steepness of the terrain. And after I told him about this mountain, he gave me this old clinometer. He brought it to me. I have a friend with a clinometer. It's new digital. His clinometer bears no resemblance to it. It's like the difference in a calculator and an abacus, you know. So he gave me this clinometer, and I said, "Dad, I went up that mountain that you gave me the clinometer for. Do you remember giving me the clinometer?" And he didn't say anything. And I said, "I wish you could have been there, because you love a good alpine meadow, and that meadow was in full bloom," I said, "and there was tiger lilies. They were orange, and I could see them against the blue sky." And then my voice kind of broke, and I said, I really wish I was there with you, and I wish you felt better. And then my dad spoke to me and he said, Suzanne, and it was real deliberate and slow, he said, it's okay. It's gonna be all right. And I bear some measure of guilt about this because I knew my dad was in pain, and he and I both knew that he was dying. He was 94 years old. He had no strength, and the little energy that he had, he used to comfort me. And he died some days after that. Those were the last words my dad ever said to me. And that incident encapsulates my relationship with Jack Lewis. And I thank you for listening.
It's sure nice to see all of you, every one of you. Thank you for coming. Let me tell you a few short stories about Dad. He was well thought of in the company, and he said he was working in San Francisco in the main office there, and his boss, his immediate boss, came to him and said, "The old man wants to talk to you." He's referring to the vice president. "The old man wants to talk to you." And so Dad took the elevator up to the 19th floor, and went into the vice president's office, and the man said, "You heard about the death of so-and-so in Bakersfield." He said, this was the pipeline manager in Bakersfield, and Dad said, "Yeah, that was a shame. You know, the fellow died of a massive heart attack with the vice president sitting next to him in the car." And Dad said, "Yeah, that was a shame. He was the nicest guy, and we'll sure miss him." And the vice president said, he said, "Jack, I want you to go down to Bakersfield. I want you to go down to Bakersfield and unlock his desk and get to work." And then he waved him out of the office. And so Dad was well thought of. He was put in places that needed attention, that needed a good manager, a fellow who works well with people, somebody who understands all the technicalities of the business. When Dad was, when Dad was 10 years old, my mother's family came from Salt Lake City to Lehigh to visit. It was a friend of my grandmother's who she met in nursing school. This family lived around the corner from my grandparents on Center Street. And so the neighbor kid said, "Jack, come over here and meet our friends." And Dad said, very properly as a 10-year-old, he said, "I don't want to meet any girls." And then a few minutes later, he came past on his bicycle. He rode very deliberately past their house on his bicycle, and he was riding his bicycle backwards. And so he deliberately called attention to himself and met my mother. And they were friends ever since. And I'm grateful for their example in their marriage. They were indeed friends, and they rarely had difficult words. And I'm very thankful for that example. I'm thankful to Dad for growing a garden and growing an orchard. And I learned from that I have to grow a big garden. And half of the reason is to gather up extra fruit and vegetables to share with neighbors, because it's the great opportunity to spend time with neighbors and give them a little piece of our labor. And I'm glad for Dad's example of that. One more story. Dad was 12 years old. It was 1938 or 39. It was the Great Depression. And it was early fall. The weather was getting cold, and Dad used to walk home. He cut diagonally across the city lot. There was this little tiny city hall, and Lehigh's grown a lot since then, of course. But there's a little city hall and other buildings there. And so he heard a voice calling from a window, and the fellow said, "Boy, please come here and talk to me." And this fellow was calling to him from the window of the jail. And so Dad went up to the window, and the fellow said, you'd think he'd ask for a file or something, but no, he said, "Do you know how to drain a radiator?" And in those days, antifreeze existed, but apparently few people could afford to buy antifreeze for their car. They were lucky to afford food for the table. And so what you do is when you park the car for the night, you turn the little petcock valve underneath the radiator and drained out the water from the engine in the car, so your engine block wouldn't freeze and break. And so this fellow says, "Do you know how to drain a radiator?" And Dad said, "Yeah, I think so." And he said, "See that car parked over in the corner?" He says, "That's my car, and it's gonna freeze here soon." He says, "If you could drain that radiator, I would really appreciate it." And so Dad did that. He found a little valve underneath and drained the guy's radiator. And so simple act of service and kindness. And Dad was always sharing those little acts of kindness. Apples from the orchard, fresh peaches. He was always sharing those little acts of kindness. And I am thankful for his example. I'm thankful for his friendliness, and he would go up to people that he didn't know and talk to them. He wasn't shy about about meeting new people, about visiting with people. He was not shy at all. And living in Bakersfield with a lot of Hispanics there, he took Spanish class in the evening. And he said, I got a C- in that class. You know, but he really wanted to converse with people. You know, he wanted to converse with the Hispanic folks. So he did his best to learn Spanish, and that wasn't one of his talents. But his friendliness and his outgoing nature was his talent, and I'm very grateful for that. And I've had to push myself to, you know, to do the same thing. And so thank you all. It was a joy for me to be with him in the last few years. I moved down to Alpine temporarily a couple years ago, and to be with my parents because they needed help. And my poor mother, I was trying to help her back from the bathroom, and she just kind of collapsed, and I eased her down onto the floor, and I said, Mom, can you crawl to the bed? And no, she couldn't crawl to the bed. And I looked at Dad. I said, Dad, you and I can't pick up Mom and take her to bed. I think desperate times call for desperate measures, and we called the ambulance, you know, and sure enough, she had a heart condition that needed attention, so it was challenging, but it was a real reward for me to spend that time together with them, and then to come visit on a very regular basis when they moved into assisted living. And so I was with Dad when he passed away, and I'm thankful. I'm thankful for that opportunity. And again, thanks to all of you for your friendship with my parents. Thank you for your kindness to them. Thank you very much.
Kyle asked me to tell you why I'm here. For about the last 20 years, our designated reserved row in our chapel was the second one from the back on the right-hand side, which was right in front of Jack and Jerry's designated row. So every Sunday we got to visit with them before church and after church, and spend time in their home. And one Sunday, I'm wearing her favorite tie. She always loved this tie. One Sunday she handed me an envelope, and so I opened it up, and there was this letter inside. It said, I would like this old love song from the 1940s, sung at my funeral by Alan Green, if possible. Thank you, Jerry. And she's got the lyrics on here. She left a few lines out of the lyrics, but I knew the lyrics. So then she leaned forward and she said, do you know that song? And I said, yeah, I know that song. She said, this is a hard thing for me to ask. And I said, no, it's fine. Because 10 years ago when she did it, I could sing. But now I'm 70. And I told Laurel to never let me sing when I turned 70. But I thought I was off the hook because Jerry passed away during COVID. And I went, oh, that's nice, because I told her I would do it. I didn't want to be on her bad side. So I told her I would do it, but then I thought I was off the hook, and then Jack asked me to sing it today. So, this is a great old song from the war years called I'll Be Seeing You, and I just think it's appropriate because I think they're loving seeing each other again. I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places that this heart of mine embraces all day through. In the small cafe, the park, across the way, the children's carousel, the chestnut trees, the wishing well, and I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day, in everything that's light and gay. I'll always think of you that way. I'll find you in the morning sun, and when the night is new, I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be seeing you. I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day, in everything that's light and gay. I'll always think of you that way. I'll find you in the morning sun, and when the night is new, I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be seeing you.
Our Father in heaven, as we have met this day to share memories and remembrances of Jack Lewis, we wish to express our gratitude for the time that we were blessed to know him, to associate with him. We're so grateful for his example of how to live. And we pray that as we go forward from here, we will always remember and be able to incorporate those things that we have learned from him into our lives. We love Jack very much, Father, and are grateful at this time that he and Jerry are together again. We're grateful for the knowledge that we have of eternal families and that life continues beyond here, and how blessed we are to have known them and to have loved them. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
We wish to thank those that have taken part in the program. We'd invite the congregation now to please stand. The interment will be at the Alpine Cemetery, and we'd invite those of you that are interested to please join the family there for that event. The grave site will be dedicated by Kyle, is that correct? And we, again, appreciate your attendance.
Those of you acting as our casket bearers, we'll just have you line up beside these doors over here.
Nobody's been appointed.
Okay. Do you want to maybe ask those who would like to help escort?
Whoever would like to help, please come forward.
Sure.